From the Post Building in downtown North St. Louis, this is Inside City. Today I'm interviewing Margaret McDonald, Marketing Principal for HOK in St. Louis. She is part of a legacy team that is leading HOK in a changing world of technology, diversity, and accessibility. Hi, Margaret. Thanks for giving us a little bit of time today. I want to start off with a quote I read in one of your previous articles. And you said, I see interior design as a big crossroads of art and business and people. It's so much about people and experiences. So you have a BFA from the Institute of the Chicago Art Institute in interior architecture, also a BFA in art history from Boulder. And I think in one of your things you talked about photography as well. But you ended up doing interior design as a way. And so talk about that, how your personal trip.
Sure. I went to college, went to University of Colorado Boulder, thinking I was going to study and started studying political science. In high school, I was always really involved in the arts. A big photographer, also worked in clay. And so I gravitated in my electives to still be taking a lot of art classes and art history. And it kind of hit me part of the way through that was what I wanted to do. So shifted over to art history, which was, I think, incredibly foundational, just like having any type of history degree. What you learn of different influences, mediums, all the different genres that things have gone through. And even though maybe it's defined as art, it really is architecture and a bigger picture of history as things have changed. So switched there to art history, and then didn't know what I was going to do when I was graduating, and ended up going out to Seattle with a friend. And when I was there, I worked in a stock photo agency. And this is, dating myself. This is before everything was digital. We were still with film and transparencies. And at the time, I also had a dark room and worked in photography. And that pulled me into more of a business setting of understanding clients and working with people. And at that time, also, I was around a whole group of UW architects, architectural students, people getting their masters. And that helped me make this pivot. And I really, as I said in that quote previously, being an interior architect, interior designer really feels like sculpting. And you are taking form of space, but also really understanding what your client's trying to achieve. And that could be a hospital, it could be an airport, it could be, it's a corporation, and knowing that what their goals are, and that form and shape and space and sound and light and all of that can make them thrive and make it a great business. I also, as an interior designer, think so much about the spaces that we create, and that people spend often more time there than they spend, at their homes, other places. So it's so important.
Well, at the end of the day, we're inside buildings more than any other way. And so the interiors really do have an impact in how people feel. And they've done a lot more with the science of that as far as mood and furniture ergonomics. It's come a long way in the last 20 years.
Definitely. You used to just lay people out in space in a corporate environment, and everyone just sort of was given the same
cube farm,
or even when it became benching, just kit of parts. And now understanding that if spaces are unassigned and they're height adjustable, and you look at the range of tasks you do during the day and how you need that range of spaces to support those. Some of it's a team, some of it's private, some of it's individual, and you need to be able to move around and get to those spaces.
And with COVID doing what it did, and now this hybrid work situation that we find ourselves in, I remember talk 30 years ago about hoteling, and that this was a new thing out on the coast, and now it's everywhere. And the idea that your office is not something that's yours and you're just there for a little bit is a trend that corporate America is adopting more and more.
Definitely adopting it. A lot of people are all in. A lot of people do maybe part of their teams, but we are also seeing that many people do need something that's really identified as theirs in the space. And if, that could be an office, it could be a workstation, it could be lockers, or it could be a zone within it. One of our colleagues at HOK was recently interviewed for an article for Bloomberg where that was discussed. And she's in our Toronto office. But seeing that for some people, especially as you're trying to get people to come back and you're asking them to come in and collaborate, they need a piece of stability. And I think that goes back to what you were saying too, with understanding the importance of certain things with mental health and the way our brains work. And, for some of us just need to know, like, my chair is there and this is where I get to go when I come here.
And the implication is that you can fit more people in a smaller amount of space. We're still working through what that means as far as if you had 100 people in the space, maybe now you aim at 150 because they're not all there at once.
Right. Earlier in my career, definitely 15 years ago, everything you would constantly be calculating that square foot per person, and corporations were trying to drive it down as low as possible. And we were often hitting up right against code. Now we don't have that conversation as much. It's a more accepting, well, especially with corporations or businesses that want people to be there. If they want their teams coming together, so much more gets put on the table to have a conversation about what they should have to bring them in. We recently finished working on Brown and Krupin's space on the Hill, and Andy Krupin said, he's like, I'm in competition with someone's home where they have their refrigerator, they're comfortable. He's like, I need to bump up the game.
And beyond the amenities, you then have also the technology that has to be put in, or conference rooms that may be very close to each other, and you have more soundproofing. Everything that goes into that is something that's newer, that wasn't there a few years ago.
Definitely. People have their setups at home that work really well for them. They're comfortable. And then sometimes we're asking groups to go into rooms where you're presenting to a client, but you don't have it all at your fingertips like you do maybe at your home setup. I think in the next few years, we're going to see an elevation of the technology leader, the technology designer on the project. So often it's been a consultant that might come in a little too late, I think, in the project. I also think what we're also seeing, the investment is changing. So people used to start a project and you're looking at construction and you're looking at your furniture and your the FF&E, but people were always, that number of what we're now investing in spaces for technology is up there, creeping up high and equal to those.
So in the post building here, which was a collaboration of Trivers and Canon, which was conceived pre-COVID, there were no private offices. It's really this very collaborative environment. Do you think the private office is dead then?
I don't think the private office is completely dead. I think it's by industry. We've recently finished law firm projects, as I said, Brown and Krupin, but also Pulcinelli, and the way lawyers work, and that many times they're on calls.
Privacy.
Right. They have privacy, so they can be, hands-free on a speakerphone. They'll do something, or obviously if you and I went into a law firm, we'd want privacy in the conversations we're having. So I think things are much more business by business, market sector, what's appropriate to make that group of people do the best they can.
And I mean, we start off talking about interiors because I think that very much impacts how people feel, and more so than they may even realize, like the importance of, say, even tall ceilings or light, natural light, those types of things. But you aren't really doing that right now. You're your principal at HOK on the marketing side, and that very interesting transition. Then, how did you make that from interiors to marketing?
I think as interior designers and interior architects, you work so closely with your clients, and you build relationships and establish repeat clients. And I was always very involved in pursuing and winning new work. So it was a kind of a natural progression that happened. It was difficult at times to back off and not still want to, be with the project team all the time. I do, though, in my role, have the opportunity to be working with clients, especially early on in the projects, helping to establish goals and program and vision for those. And then I like to try to keep in touch and see what's going on as things develop.
So really a natural progression from what you were doing previously.
A natural progression, and also a lot of it I would credit to when I was at Arcturus and worked with Pat Whitaker. Pat taught all of us who had the opportunity to work with her about how important being connected to the community was, and encouraged us. She helped me get on the first board I was on, and had a very authentic way of teaching us to be connected with people and what's going on, and how that then naturally led to business development, because you maybe spend 4 years once a month in a meeting with somebody for something in the arts, or some other not-for-profit or community type organization, and then when they had a project, they would naturally reach out. And it was it was a good lesson. I appreciate what I learned from her, and that blending of our life, our city, and our work together.
Just to list a couple of the boards that you're on now: the Urban Land Institute, International Women's Forum, the United Way, Contemporary Art Museum. I think it's more than business development for you. Clearly, you've got a real passion for giving back to the community.
Definitely. Some of the things that I've achieved on different boards, I'm incredibly proud of. Even smaller organizations. I used to be on Perennials Board, which is a not-for-profit that's focused on reuse and sustainability, and there help them move. I was on Metro Theater Company's board and helped them when they relocated to Grand Center. It's a really interesting, rewarding way of bringing skills that you have and helping organizations. I always end up being on or chair of the facility team. I also recently was invited to join on the board of trustees for the art museum, which has been incredibly enjoyable to understand more of the workings of the art museum and be able to support that at that level. And again, I'm part of the facilities.
Yeah. Well, and you bring that expertise, which is then valuable, that time, talent, or treasure to the organization. A specific thing that you've been involved with is in a women in leadership role, in providing mentorship to women, not necessarily just in architecture.
Correct. I've done a lot of women in leadership with the United Way, has a really great mentoring program that was incredibly active during the pandemic, and the group I had during that time period, we got to know each other really well. But I think it's important for people to have resources, be able to bounce questions off of about career decisions, and then also hear stories. Now that I'm part of IWF, International Women's Forum, that for me is very interesting, because there's many women who are way before me that, Blanche Tuhill is at events and can tell stories, or other women who talk about. Someone the other day at one of the meetings talked about early in her career, and was reminding us at that point, she couldn't have a credit card, had to be in her husband's name, things with buying houses. And we're all just dumbfounded that was in the 60s and 70s. So it's nice to have people who I learn from, and then people who I can help as well.
And I think it's interesting because architecture is traditionally, interior design less so, but architecture is historically been male dominated. And one of the most high profile women architects out there right now may or may not be a household name, but is Jeannie Gang in Chicago, did the 100 on 100 Kings Highway and different things about that. And so it does seem that a lot of that work that's been done has helped women advance and not just break the glass ceiling, but in architecture specifically.
Definitely. That, her name is the name of the firm. She's out speaking often, and her work is pretty amazing and creative and pushing boundaries. It would be great to see more. You look back at the Zaha Hadid, but there's just not as many as you would hope there are. I remember a few years ago, and I don't know if you saw it, there was an article in the New York Times that talked about architecture and what happened to women in the firm or in the profession. And it said that one of the things that they came up to with is that a lot of men, and again, this is big sweeping,
Sure.
but that see the field in a pretty narrow way. Like you're different, that, you're an architect and now doing development and many other things. But a lot of women get an architecture degree and run in many directions with it. So I always thought that was interesting. And I have a good friend who has galleries, and she has a master's in architecture. And it is interesting to chart that path a little bit.
Yeah, I think in some ways architecture is it's a great thing to study, and it's a lot tougher as a profession. And just like maybe law can be a good basis for any one of a number of things to go into, say, politics, for example. And it does have that versatility because it is so broad.
That foundation of design thinking, I think it's really hit me the last few years, more of what that is, that you were taught to have an idea, feel comfortable tossing out the idea, have someone build on it, and not feel that your idea was taken away.
Yeah, or maybe it was. I mean, that design process could be pretty rigorous.
It can be,
but yes.
But that we go into meetings with feeling comfortable that a lot of people are going to throw out ideas, and we're going to come together for the best solution.
And I mean, that is part of what you learn in architecture school. Is you're sort of very vulnerable. You pin up your work, and then people criticize it, and hopefully it's a better product because of that. And certainly then helps promote collaborative solutions. So I think it's interesting.
It is. You talked about pinning up.
Mm-hmm.
That's something we're really seeing, a generational shift, that my generation, people even a few years behind me in school, we were all used to, you had to print it and pin it up, or take your trace and pin it up. And now people who are graduating that were really always so in the computer, in the model, on the screen, they struggle with that. And we're trying in the studio right now to really find that crossroads where a team can come together and both are able to visualize without being frustrated with each other.
That's interesting.
It's really interesting.
And what I also find interesting is HOK, which, as I was going through, is very much known for things like airports in Saudi Arabia, or very, very large skyscrapers and things like that. And as a firm, it still does some of those big things, such as the soccer stadium here, the baseball stadium, and whatnot. But that the firm is now, like, I'm surprised to hear like you're doing interiors for a law firm. And so it seems that the firm now has pivoted in many ways, still doing some of the bigger projects, but some of the smaller ones as well.
Yes. HOK is amazing about pulling big teams together and managing and delivering large, complicated projects all over the world. Things like LaGuardia, you mentioned the soccer stadium. But from that, you have a studio of talented people. And if you're assigned to a project for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, hospitals, 10 years, there's cycles through those, and not everybody's brain works on that scale. So our interior design team, the landscape architecture team, lighting design, they all work on smaller projects that can be standalone to their discipline, or they cross over.
It requires a certain flexibility to work at different scales.
Yes. And we discover people who really prefer one or the other, where they a little bit drowned in the big, or if they're used to the big ones and they get onto something where it's just, a designer and a technical person, and they need that team to help them manage and get through.
And so the HOK is George Helmuth, Gio Obata, and George Kassabaum, which are the original founders. And I was thinking, well, Gio just died, but then I looked up, it's actually been 2 years at 99. And as the design force of that firm. And What responsibility do you feel stepping into that legacy of a 75-year-old firm, but still the firm having a different identity because things are different from when the three founders were there?
Yeah, definitely. I feel fortunate that I'm in the city where it all started. And so we have that legacy and that, we have drawings in the office where we mark everything we've worked on. And, we're always adding something or we forgot we missed something. So it is interesting to live somewhere where as I move around during the day, so many things that we've worked on or that Gio worked on are around us. Um, it's a shift too as the firm went from being a small firm, the original founders, to now 1,700 people and 26 offices, and less about individuals and more about what we do as a whole. But then, we have a really strong design principal here, Eli Hoisington, who led the design of the soccer stadium, led the design of the last Centene building that went up in Clayton, works on projects all over.
And I think he had an article in the Business Journal not too long ago talking about the
He
airports
did.
and the different ones that HOK had worked on, and the one now that we're planning in St. Louis, which I understand the design has not been awarded yet, at least for the main terminal.
That's correct. Right now, it's a lot of the planning work, and they hope to send out the RFQ for the design in the fall. Eli came to HOK from our HOK New York studio. And so there he was working on LaGuardia early on and other aviation projects. So it's great that we're having him here.
The airport is the front door, and LaGuardia was just such an awful mess for so long, and now it's completely different.
Oh yeah. Now you land and you hear a lot of stories where people linger or they arrive early so you can just be in the space, before you go out over the big arm and can stare out.
I mean, there's literally a shopping mall in the middle of it, big fountain and all that. And when hearing Rhonda talk about our airport, the one thing I wasn't always aware of is how important on the business side, concessions and things you don't really think about. There's gate fees, but those concessions actually play into the airport and ability to borrow against future revenues and bonds and all that.
Airports are really complicated, multi-tenant, multi-shareholder experience projects. Hearing Rhonda speak and talking about incrementally how she's moving this forward and projects that I've been aware of in our office and alignment. And also, I think thinking through, you think in our lifetime, how much aviation's changed from size of planes, technology, safety. And, we have people who are studying what's going to be ahead where, your phone, your app knows what your flight is. It probably knows where your hotel is. So what types of things are going to be put in place that, will pull up and your bags go and your bags end up at your hotel. You don't even, deal with them.
It's hard to anticipate even, thinking back, like accessibility was something that a lot of people didn't think about or may not be aware of, like even just going into a restroom and having clear distances. The new thing now seems to be security and not just going through the TSA, but other aspects of security of, say, technology. And if you get on the airport Wi-Fi, is it really secure? And that could be the next piece. And it's hard to anticipate how those design decisions need to be made now. I think I heard Rhonda say, like, even the distance between the planes and the standards of widths, our airport is designed for another time and place.
Definitely. Well, and as those planes sized up and that pinched, you also have that many more people, disembarking and then filling up the terminal space. That's what we all saw at LaGuardia, where, the spaces were so narrow and so many people pulling in and you couldn't support it with concessions. But that thinking forward of how to create a design that supports now, but you also have ideas in place of the way engineering and different systems are going to allow you some flexibility.
I mean, another big thing that is the sustainability or LEED certification, which is morphed a little bit to just what does it mean to have economically sustainable buildings, which can be a little bit tricky.
Definitely. And I would say the next thing we're seeing past sustainability is resiliency. And so designing buildings that when there's flood, when there's hurricane, tornado, just back to the whole business of design and architecture and construction. People are struggling now to be able to have projects go forward in some areas because the insurance, they can't get it right. It's all lopsided. And so we now have a head of resiliency who is helping all of us with this other layer of checklists of things that we should be asking and looking at. And a lot of that's also just safety, in an area here like tornadoes, where can we get to that we're safe within our buildings?
For example, if let's say there was a flood, and historically you think, well, there's a flood, you got to tear the building down. But if you did parking on the first 2 level, poured concrete, flood goes in, goes out, and you got a mess, but you don't have to tear the building down.
Exactly. You accept that some areas are going to flood. You get your lobbies up higher. Think through things with your elevators and your circulation.
So shifting a bit then to just design and good design, and talking a little bit about St. Louis. And you mentioned this morning at the GSL Leadership Council about HOK's decision to stay downtown, which they've been downtown for all of their 75-year history. I think you guys are in the Equitable building and looking for different options. And I think you said also, should this really be news? And you guys had a forum event about that. And so talk about that and the decision to stay downtown and bringing the community in.
Sure. Couple things with that, with our team in our process. As our lease is coming up, we surveyed everybody, and we wanted to hear from them, get their thoughts. And just like any client, there's the things that you expect of what people want with feeling comfortable, heating, cooling, plenty of storage, all that type of stuff. But people had other questions about what was happening with downtown. They kept seeing more and more people leaving, who's going to be here. And something that I've been thinking about a lot too is how people get information. 20
Great
years
question.
ago,
Yeah.
we read the same newspapers, we listened to the radio going home. Now information is so diluted and comes from so many different sources.
Well, it's like the unreliable narrator in a movie, right? You're getting it from what source? And yeah, that then becomes the narrative,
Definitely. And I stay very informed through participation with organizations like GSL and reading the information they send out. So being aware of what developments are going on downtown, what they're working on in events. So after we did the survey and there were lots of questions, I was at GSL for Kurt Weigel was giving an updated presentation in downtown, came up to him and just asked, will you come and do a team event? And he was like, I'd love to. And then within a few days after that, I was around Jared Boyd with the mayor's staff, and he brought up, where we are and our lease and everything. And I said that we were doing this, and he was like, the mayor should be there too. Let me get, have her come. As I said this morning, really what woke up in a lot of people is the connection to, and I think even more for architects and designers that know they're creating spaces that are part of a whole and a part of a community, that then there is everybody seeing how HOK being downtown is part of a bigger community. And also what you have access to by being downtown, that we can walk to the Arch grounds, we can go to City Garden, you can go over to a day baseball game, you can hear the cannon go when we hit a home run. You're around all of that. We can walk to many of our clients, we can walk to restaurants. And so it became pretty easy decision that we would stay and we'd be part of it. Now, the other part that I brought up this morning, and you touched on, was when I talked to our director of communications, and I was working with Tony Weichel with GSL, and we were setting up this team all staff meeting, and brought up, what about doing a press release saying we're committed to downtown? And definitely somewhat I was reacting to one more time, seeing a headline saying somebody was moving. And our head of communications really was like, well, is that news?
Yeah.
But that led us to all of us talking about downtowns. And I don't think there's a downtown in the United States right now that's just, you know,
So maybe Miami, which is all residential and they're getting like money from everywhere, is
sure.
about the only one that doesn't seem to have slowed
Well,
down.
and that's interesting that it's all residential.
Correct.
So where
Yes.
ours for so long was just heavy on where you came to
CBD, right.
work. Exactly. And maybe came to the game.
I think the ones that are doing better, the Nashvilles, have more of that mixed use, which is better urban design anyway.
Hmm. And a lot about the planning that had been done for downtown, introducing more residential. I'm always surprised how many units there are. And it looks like there should be some more coming online too around the stadium, but both stadiums actually, the baseball stadium, but also soccer. And I think it's, they all feed on each other.
Because the narrative is that downtown is unsafe. And I think for a long time, that was just people talked about. It became something, it doesn't take too many statistics or too many incidents where it'll skew a number. And so it's both become a perception, somewhat of a reality. Things have improved. They're not where we want. At the end of the day, it's density. It's people on the street who want to be down here and take advantage of a walkable city. Having lost it, it's hard to get it back.
It is. And I think you're right with perception. If you or anyone walks down a street that's empty, that things are closed up, it doesn't feel great. It feels a little creepy. I feel safe and move all around downtown during the workday, early evening. But I think that activity, curated events, vibrancy is what's needed to help. I think about that a lot. Like how when people talk about downtown is concern of safety not the first thing, and how long will it take, and all the activities that need to come in place to help with that.
I mean, arguably, Washington Avenue has a lot more basis than it did in the late 90s when a lot of the original work that Zach Boyers with US Bank had helped fund and Craig Heller, and really it was a small group of individuals who took on one building at a time. And it was growing, and it would seem to me it shouldn't be too hard to get at least portions of that back. And it would seem that the path forward is you build on the things that are working, the smaller pieces, and that you stabilize and strengthen those, and then you move out from there.
Right. I think it's exactly that, those small pieces. And then that can help, I think, with the bigger challenges of AT&T Railway.
And Kurt Weigel mentioned this morning, that it's not always the big idea. Of course, we want the moonshot, the thing that everyone can get around. And part of the idea with St. Louis being as diverse as it is, and with all these different needs and how do you meet them, in lieu of a big idea, can you at least get on base? Can you, these small wins and victories? And so Kurt's mentioned that. And so celebrating a small win is good.
Definitely. I think, and we need to find more of them that we share with everybody. I think there could be a much bigger network too, of understanding what restaurants and businesses are open. How can, when I first started working in the 1990, 87, 98, but there was that great organization. You remember the name that was downtown? And they would on Thursdays
Yeah, that was Matt O'Leary did that.
And Matt O'Leary and Chad and
shoot, I'm blanking on it.
But we need something like that again. And you'd meet up and, they do happy hours and hop around to 3 or 4 different places. And that we walked into bars that either you didn't know were there or you never would have thought of going into. And it was so vibrant, so much fun. And everyone was walking around. So I think it's those little things of activating. I think also there's something right now in the generation of the people who are the youngest who are entering the workforce. There's this confusion. It feels like people want retail and they want all of these things, and we all do it, I guess, to a certain extent. I shouldn't put it just to that generation, but then when it's time to get lunch, you use an app and have it delivered to you.
Yeah.
And so, what impact would it make if, 50 people actually walked and picked up their lunch or walked and sat down in the restaurant versus delivering it.
Well, and you have this before where somebody who eats at their desk, for example, and can you get those people to, whether you eat at your desk or not, at least come out and help activate the street? And then it's, well, why should they? So let's figure out the program or the thing that'll pull them away. And because it's a chicken and egg thing. The retail isn't here because the people aren't necessarily there, and it's getting that density back so that it starts to make sense again.
Yeah. We need to have a series of a show up and be present at lunch hour. Because we all get busy too, and then do exactly what you said. Just grab your lunch and be like, oh, I'm going to sit at my desk and catch up on my emails.
One of the things I think SLDC has sponsored are these, I think a $50,000 tenant improvement grant on retail to open up a shop. And there've been a couple of restaurants, Venezuelan one, I think, on Wash Ave another one that have taken advantage of that opportunity. So these are small things, but taken together, they can start to have an impact.
I agree.
So you're never supposed to ask an architect their favorite project, because I think it's like picking your favorite child, or I think the phrase, I don't know if it was Frank Lloyd Wright or somebody said, well, it's the next one, but do you have a project that you're particularly proud of? I think you said the first, if I have this right, you worked on the Boeing Leadership Center as the first one at HOK, but are there ones that stick out for you as being particularly memorable or special, or that you're really proud of?
Definitely. Boeing Leadership was an amazing project. To have that be the first project I worked on after graduating, in that it was, there was the Vuzier mansion that's on the site, the ballroom that was there, the site itself on the bluffs over the river, and then how that first project had hospitality, had workplace training, had big, beautiful dining rooms and workplace. So that was amazing and foundational to work on. The projects I really do love, the projects we've done here where we've renovated and preserved historic buildings. And, that recently we did that with Third Man on the hill for the Brown and Crouppen building that had been originally part of the whole Stove complex. Missouri Foundation for Health over in the Tower Grove area, that had been the Columbia Iron Works. When we walked into that, and I remember going in the first time with our structural engineer, and he just looks at me. He's like, Margaret, there's no ceiling. It's mud. It's in such bad shape. And then we've had the opportunity to work on many buildings in Cortex that have been renovations as well. So I find, like, as a designer, I really gravitate to those. I think when there's already form and built environment there that you need to preserve or work with and then build around it. When I have worked on things that are just ground up, maybe you're even starting in a field. Sometimes for myself, there's not as much push and pull there to react to.
Especially in a city like St. Louis, which has all this really interesting pieces that some are left and some are not. And it makes for an interesting design problem like this building.
Exactly. And one other I'd love to add to my list is the General American building that I worked on that with Spire.
And this Philip Johnson, I think, that designed that.
And I had the opportunity 2 or 3 times previously to look at that with clients, to test fit it, to look at how to divide it up, and it never worked. And then when we did a very exhaustive real estate search with Spire when I worked on that, which I love, an exhaustive real estate search. We did that also with Missouri Foundation for Health. But we first dismissed the building, didn't think it worked, and then came back to it. And that's exactly what it needed. It needed to be one single tenant to be able to take and make that space work.
And it's an interesting building that was really designed almost as an object or from the outside, but a lot of times it seems that there may not always be room for the interiors, because that's got all those funky angles and corners that you can't really do anything with, or I thought round buildings or cylinders could be challenging to furnish. And so you do get that push-pull tension of how to work both inside and outside.
Definitely. And that also was being done with preservation, historic tax credits. So there were certain things too that had to be followed that added another layer to it. At that point, there was a inside on the first floor, there was a triangular table, then
Hmm.
also in a room that had to be kept. And then even, working through finding lighting, seating, all of that and then what use, needed to be preserved. So then what was the right use for it?
One of the things that HOK has been very much involved with, besides your own personal with leadership with women, is DEI. And a lot of times people talk about it, but there have been a large number of scholarships that HOK has been involved with getting traditionally underrepresented communities in the field. So, for example, when I went through architecture schools, we had literally one African American student in 4 years that was in the program. Some Asian students. I think there's more of the Asian population than there would be of African American. And so HOK is really actively involved in with these scholarships. I think I read $100,000 this year, 370,000, and there's a technical side to architecture and that training that's needed to make good architects. Talk more about HOK's commitment to DEI.
We, as you said, have made large financial contributions as well as our time. We do multiple things. So we have an ongoing relationship with Tuskegee University, which is one of the historically Black colleges, where we have teams that go down there and participate in the studios and in the charrettes. We do some even virtually with them. But then we also are always recruiting for interns and to have students come up and spend time with us in our studio, sometimes also getting to Atlanta. Um, we have a lot of other programs too that are looking at how, as designers, we're approaching our work to make and even to be more informed with our clients, to be looking at the diversity that the space creates. And that's been an initiative that's been
That's
um,
interesting.
right. Well, often you might have a client that, they say they have diversity goals and they want to attract a more diverse,
People of color.
people of color. And then maybe they make choices of where the building's located or that only allows a person who owns a car or can afford to Uber every day. Um, and that initiative was led by a group of younger designers, architects. I think it was all women initially and from all diverse backgrounds. So I think even that shows that connection for us of when we're helping to develop talent and bring them in. But the best thing has been this last year with, Kimberly Dowdell is the HOK. She used to be in my role in Chicago, but now she's a firm-wide role, but she's also AIA president this year. So she's the 100th president. She's the first woman of color as president. So the work that she's doing with all of us to reach even, past college, past high school, how can we be connecting to other levels has been really important.
Because ultimately, the young person has to be able to visualize themselves in that field. And so if they see people of color or women or whatever that would be, then they say, oh, I could do that.
When she came to visit St. Louis a couple weeks ago, and we did a series of events, but one of them we did was a conversation with her and Tony Raya, our technical principal at Rankin. And it was the day we combined it with Rankin's junior senior show. So
Great.
they always end their year with a big event. They invite architects and designers, but this really maximized it. And there were just hundreds of people then meeting with all the students, looking at the design and exactly what you said. All those young and up and coming future architects could connect and see people who looked like them.
So this has been very interesting. Any closing remarks or as you look forward for both HOK and yourself personally that you'd like to leave us with?
I'm really excited about seeing what comes together with the brick line being extended to the
Sure.
arch grounds. I think that level of activation, and then adding with that the recent ULI study that was done that looked at around up and down Keener and to the sides. I think having all of that visual work out in the community for people to look at to see what's possible. I'm really excited about that, and I'm always pretty positive. I think this is been a slump for downtown, and we're getting momentum and coming out of COVID, and things are getting into place. And in a few years, this is going to be a completely different place, and we'll all be really excited about it.
It's great. All right. Thanks very much for your time today.
Sure, this was great. Thanks for having me.